trees can be something that you think is simple because every game has trees. Pretty much every game has trees. And yet there's many ways to kind of execute on there. There's no perfect way. Because we wanted to have them fit our stylized world, we had to custom tailor things to make it fit our world. And so there was a lot of material work and just, again, a lot of iteration.
Hello and welcome back to How Games Are Made, the Noclip series where we dive deep into particular aspects of game design. How particular exactly? Well, for the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to talk exclusively about trees. You probably don't think about trees in games all that often, but there are so many design considerations that apply to them, from aesthetics to performance issues, how they move, how they change, what happens when they're interacted with, and so much more. By the way, if you'd like to watch episodes of this series and all of our documentaries ahead of everyone else, and support all the work we do here at Noclip to showcase the work of game developers, please consider supporting our independent team at patreon.com/Noclip. I mean, who else is making videos about trees?
Trees are really important because you see them all the time. Everyone knows what they look like. And so when you fill a space with a game, especially our game that's a farming game in a woodland world, trees were going to be a very important thing. With our game being stylized, we weren't going to have realistic looking trees where each branch was being modeled and rendered with millions of leaves. Instead, we wanted to kind of have a softer approach where it wasn't going to be so noisy. Trees are full of noise, but when you paint them with brushstrokes, they're going to be like softer, fluffier, more cloud-like. It's really important for us to have like a stylized world that looks pretty, and like one of the goals of the game is to create vibes that you want to be in, and that's very important for a cozy game that you play for 100 hours, that it's a world in a space that you want to be in. And so the trees are very important. Like a lot of times in games, like trees can look like trees and look great, but they're a little bit too noisy. They don't have that softness that you want in almost a Miyazaki film, where like those Studio Ghibli trees are realistic, but also stylized and soft and comfortable. SpeedTree is a really great tool for building out like hundreds of thousands of assets really fast and does well, but it kind of didn't fit our budget, and we wanted to do the hand author approach anyway. So building out the trees, and because they're a little bit simpler, they're not like thousands of branches, it was a little bit easier to, in Maya, just model them on our own and get the perfect fine tuning of where each branch was, to kind of, no matter what direction you're looking at the tree, it felt like a tree. I initially started thinking that they were going to be more hand painted with leaves speckled on them to create kind of that breaking up the edges, and that didn't work out. That didn't quite land. The next step was to do more of painting a like sphere with a bunch of leaves that were in a like cross-shaped pattern, and that kind of looked good. It almost worked where the shading looked fine. It just wasn't quite what we wanted. The next kind of final iteration that we landed on was creating a very specific material that was going to only be used for the trees and some of the other vegetation in the game. But it's basically taking a single plane. So as you walk around the tree, you have all these hundreds of planes moving around with the player. You don't notice the movement. If you really look, you can kind of tell. Like, I think Elden Ring is a great example where that game did it pretty well. And it's a not cheap process, but it's a pretty easy process to do rather than hand placing a million leaves on a tree.
When we implement trees in games, we have to take a lot of shortcuts. And when we think about stylized game, maybe we have some extra cheats that we can deploy that maybe a realistic tree you wouldn't be able to get away with. There's a lot of things that we have to simplify. For instance, lighting and the lighting response, and how does light penetrate through the leaf and end up on the other side. The density of how many leaves they actually are, how do we approximate that? And stylistically, how do we achieve a certain look? The billboard card system that we have that makes the tree feel very volumetric and full, but we can significantly reduce the number of cards that are there in the tree. So yeah, you can think about the cards, or whenever I refer to cards, very similar to the old school sprites. Not that card is necessarily a standardized term, but a card or billboard, it's effectively a 3D plane that starts orienting towards the camera. Traditionally, what happens is that in order to give that tree that sort of density and fullness, you insert a lot of cards. but you place the cards in such a way that when you look at it from different angles, there's still enough cards facing you such that the tree looks full. Because if you take a flat plane and you look at it side on, basically the card disappears. What we actually do is every card in the tree orients towards the player. So even when you rotate around, every card in the tree is rotating towards you. So it's always facing that way. And then because we're a stylistic game, we're able to draw the textures on each one of the cards in such a way that as they rotate, it's not obvious to the player, but it also sort of blends in. And again, if you have enough cards, it sort of, again, gives you the density and the fullness that you're looking for, and stylistically, it looks right. That also reduces the number of cards we actually have to draw. Of course, there's a little bit more cost in that now we're using a material and a vertex offset to actually get them to orient and rotate towards the player. But that is one of the techniques that we're deploying. One of the things that we've had to do, because we took some of these shortcuts in order to give it the volume and density of a full canopy as just using, fewer number of cards, we have to simulate the fact that, hey, what happens when light passes through one leaf, hits the leaf behind it, and then behind that one, and behind that one, and then finally it reaches the player's eye on the other side. So what we do is we author additional auxiliary textures that are part of the material, and they contain, in effect, density information, surface orientation information, like basically normals. We use those types of auxiliary data and information to approximate the fact that, okay, imagine if this was a volume that was full of leaves, what is the rough average effect of a ray of light passing from one side to the other and finally reaching the player?
Trees are static objects, but in real life, they move around, and just having a stationary tree looks terrible. And so you need some kind of movement. What you do in the material is apply noise patterns into the vertex offsets of the trees. So you get that little bit of tree shake animation, making it look like there's wind blowing through. Really, there's actually only a few types of them. There's a maple tree, there's an oak tree, there's a pine tree, there's a birch tree, and there's a couple other special trees that we have. But you end up layering them all over the world. So you just change the scale, you rotate it a little bit, and so all that variation, those small variations make for what it looks like a forest of all these unique trees, which is really great use of that one resource that you made. And with that, you do color variation on it. So there's a slight noise mask that goes on it that changes a little bit of the hue on that tree color. So one tree next to it might look slightly different from the scale, the rotation of it, and also just a slight color difference. Color also can pick up the ground layer. So it can know what the ground color is and kind of apply that to its either underside or the full leaf color. Our game has seasons, so of course you need to change based on seasons too. So in the winter time, the leaves go away, obviously, and there might be snow collected on the trees. In the fall, they turn a different color. And even between spring and summer, there might be a slight hue and saturation color change that we wanted just to give that a little bit extra feeling. And all that's driven by the material itself and what color parameters get chosen.
In order to build our world, we certainly have to think about variation and how do we make it so that it's not monotonous and you have some visual interest in the environment. We sort of break it into two main areas. One is what I will call visibility. So in the wintertime, we need all the leaves to go away. In the summertime, all the leaves are there. That's just a visibility toggle. And those are handled in basically a data layer where things can be turned on and off based on parameters and settings that exist. The other area of variation that exists is they're there across the spectrum that we're actually looking at, but we need to make them look different or change something about them. That might be between summer and fall. So the leaves are always there, but we do need to vary their color and perhaps even have a transition. And again, I just use seasons as an example, but also might be that we need things to look a certain way during the daytime in the morning, and then we want the material to look slightly different at night and have an interpolation in between. In those cases, we handle it using material parameters, and so those are curves that the artists author. We absolutely have to not just think about a single individual tree, we have to think about a forest of trees, and how do we pull that off? So LOD systems are definitely at play, and it's almost entirely driven by the direction the player is looking and where the player is located. We LOD the trees basically as one unit. Each individual tree has an LOD that they can swap to, but the bulk of the calculation is not done on an individual tree basis, because if that was the case, we would just have way too many trees that we have to calculate for. So there's generally clusters of trees that share the same LOD, and we're sort of calculating it on a per cluster basis. Lower LODs use more simplified materials and more simplified meshes, and so the further you are away from that, those trees are further simplified. The other area of LODs that we have to consider specifically for our game is what level of interactivity do we need to allow for the trees. Our game has, of course, trees just like every other game, in they need to look, even if they're stylized, look a certain way, but all of our trees are interactable. You can walk up to them, chop them down, they then need to turn into a dynamic physics object and produce resources and roll around. In order to pull that off, we are also looking at when do we need to make a tree an interactable object that you can actually interact with, versus, hey, this thing just needs to be a simplified representation of the real version of the tree that is just rendered. So again, there's another LOD system at play there that is instantiating real interactable trees, because the player is now close enough and we actually need you to be able to interact with them, versus, hey, this thing is far off in the distance, just have a visual representation and don't overload the physics system with the physical representations of the tree itself.
When a tree falls in a game, it can happen a million different ways. And I think that's the thing, is you look at all these examples of games that came before you and take your pick at what kind of style that you want to attempt based on scope and scale and your ability and what's appropriate for your game and your goals. A lot of games, when you hit a tree and destroy it, it just plays a VFX and that's it. You have some items on the ground, you either pick them up directly or they go into your inventory. For us, there's like, when you chop a tree, or at least in your imagination, you kind of want that like nice creaking fall over sound. That like almost like 2-second pause where you're waiting for it to kind of land on the ground and see what happens. So right off the bat, we knew we wanted to have that experience. My first take on it, I did my best physics version where weirdly variable fall speeds, whether it was super fast or super like slow, like it would take 10 seconds to fall over, at least proved the point. It wasn't shippable. And so that's where I think Zabir came in and cleaned up a lot of the physics on it. But definitely that experience of having that creaking fall over and then kind of explode into a bunch of pickups felt good.
When we think about the physics of a tree, you really want to tailor it to the game that you're making. For us, at least, we didn't want it to be a chaos physics engine sort of a thing where, like it's a madhouse where things fall and bounce all over the place. And so if you actually look at our trees falling, the trees do fall in a very predictable way, but it feels natural because we're letting the physics system handle the fall, but the parameters that go into setting up the tree to tip over, it's actually very pre-planned. And of course, that allows us to tailor so that it's not a sandbox of just things bouncing like crazy.
You can see that they like pulsate when you hit them, so there's a little bit of user feedback that, hey, what you did was correct. And it feels good to collect those resources. And so that whole loop, you're doing maybe like 10 times early on to get some resources, 100 times later, maybe 1,000 times by the time you finish the game. So getting that loop to feel good, from the look of the trees, to interactions, animations, the user feedback on hitting the tree, the sound effect that accompanies it, the physics of it falling over, coupled with all the items popping out, needs to really nail that feeling, because it's something that someone's gonna do a lot, and so it better feel good and be fun. It's a handshake, right? It's not just one thing interacting with the other. You need the character and the animations and the acts animations to feel good, but at the same time, you need the tree to react and handshake with that interaction. So one of the first inspirations there was I was playing a lot of Fortnite at the time, and so when you hit things with your pickaxe, it does a little pulse animation. The next step was adding audio to that to make sure that hit felt good. The tricky thing is, if you ever like hit a log with an axe, it's pretty sharp and it doesn't feel good, it doesn't sound good. And so, but in our cozy game, you kind of need to be abstract with the sound design and make it feel and sound appropriate, even if it's not accurate. And so that's where a lot of like unique creative challenges come into play. Trees are nearly done in the game. Actually, they were being updated now just to get the rest of the versions there. So currently, the tree could grow from a sapling into the full tree. We had some versions done, and then we're now finally done with the rest, and now you can chop them down completely. So we're like this month wrapping that up completely, which will be great to have like that kind of finished and moving on to the next thing.
So trees certainly took quite a bit of time to develop and get to where we are. Obviously there was a lot of visual development that we had to do, and then there was a lot of technical challenges that we had to solve as well. So far they're playing pretty well, they interact well in the game, and I think we won't fully know whether we're done until we do enough playtests where players are giving us the right feedback.